there's a faithful community, because a church in any community is like an embassy. We're like an embassy to heaven, right?
Yeah.
And so what the closest thing we have as a people when it comes to experiencing heaven is the local church. You don't get this at the universities. You don't get this in libraries. You don't get this in corporations. You don't get this in sports teams. You don't get this at any of our other jobs. But we get this here because here we're united around the person of Jesus Christ, just like we will be in heaven. This is Fixed on Jesus. Hey everybody, welcome back to the podcast known as Fixed on Jesus. Here we are, we gather together and we have conversations about things that people ask us questions about, things that we just want to talk about, and sometimes things that nobody's talking about and we want people to start talking about. So that's kind of how it goes. It's a kind of a runaway train that ends up going to all kinds of different directions. My name is Rich. Joining me as always is across the table, Mark Johnson Jr.
Hello.
Behind the glass, we have Heather Corbitt, who's our production coordinator.
Yeet.
And today, I don't know what that
Sorry, I
is.
couldn't help it.
Okay, yeah. Okay, we need to mute you. But anyway, what are we talking about today, Mark?
Well, besides me getting canceled, we're talking about church planning.
Yeah. Oh,
we're preparing here to
yeah.
plant a church.
Correct.
In Idaho.
Yeah, Boise, Idaho. We're praying about moving toward.
Yeah.
Working on planting a church led by Jeff and Barb Palin.
Yeah.
To a suburb of Boise, Idaho. Yeah.
Yeah. So my question is, why do we plant churches? It seems almost like you're sending good people out. You know?
Oh my gosh. Yes, exactly. Yeah. That's what happens. Well, I mean, that's the whole thing. That's the irony here when it comes to
bittersweet.
Yeah. Well, when it comes to planting churches, part of the mission, if we're being a faithful church, we're going to want to see other people in other places get saved. And the way that the God-ordained New Testament way of evangelizing is through the local church, right?
Yeah.
So the go-to passage is known as what? You know this. What's it called?
The Great Commission.
That's right. The Great Commission. Now, the Great Commission is in Matthew 28, and we see verse 16. Do you want to read verses 16 through 20?
Sure. Yeah.
Go for it.
Now the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain to which Jesus had directed them. And when they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted. And Jesus came and said to them, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go, therefore, and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. And behold, I am with you always, to the end of the age." Okay,
so that's the big, most important text in the whole Bible when it comes to missions. And so what we have here is some clear direction here. We have Jesus telling people to go and make disciples of all nations. This is not make converts. A convert is somebody maybe who makes a decision and turns away, right? We're not looking to try to get people to pray prayers. We want people to be disciples, which means to be a disciple is to follow something or someone. Yeah. So a disciple follows Jesus, and the way that disciples follow Jesus is by being in local churches, right? And so even if we send a missionary to another country, the goal of that missionary is not just to get people to pray prayers, it's to start a church in that context where we can raise up another church so that faithful people can come and learn how to be disciples or followers of Jesus Christ. Okay? And so Jesus himself says, "Go and make disciples of all nations." So that's everywhere, right? Obviously. "Baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you." So that's That's the mission of the church. Our church is meant to, and every faithful church is meant to teach what the Lord has commanded, right?
Yeah.
And also make disciples. So it's to make and mature disciples. That's our purpose, right?
Yeah.
That's why we say we're fixed on Jesus. We're fixed on Jesus because the mature disciples are fixed on Jesus. They're not fixed on the next spiritual experience or some kind of spiritual hack that we need to sort of get to, but we're fixed on Jesus because he is the key to our spiritual maturity. And so because of that, what we want to do is we want to replicate local churches, right?
Okay.
And that is totally counterintuitive. That is not the way we want to do this. Now, if you and I and Heather were leading a successful corporation, we're not going to think, you know what? We want to make sure that there are other successful organizations and corporations out there. Let's take some of our best people and send them away. Would we ever do that?
No.
No. Why?
Because it will hurt us and it will create competition.
Exactly. But what we're about is the kingdom of God.
Yeah.
Not just
the corporation.
not the corporation, and not just the proliferation of our local church. And so it can be tempting to think, oh, here we are planting a church. We're going to send people away. Yes, but that's part of what we see in the New Testament. So what we are doing is we don't want to do this, but we believe that there is a purpose to go and plant a church, to encourage the believers that are in these areas and continue to reach out to those that are unbelievers. And so it's easy to think, are we going to continue to raise up people and think, oh my gosh, here we are doing this again. Like, I understand it's hard, but it's part of the mission. We serve the kingdom of God, not the kingdom of Center Church, not the kingdom of Gilbert, none of that, right?
Gilbert.
So we're about something bigger than us. And part of the reason we're faithful to the call of the Great Commission is by planting churches, both in the United States and other countries.
Yeah.
So
That's
like,
awesome.
Yeah. So in the U.S., what we're going to do is we're going to raise up. Our goal when we think about planting to Boise, Idaho, is to encourage people to pray about going and participating on the church plant. But anybody who's a part of our church, we're all going to be active in this. Whether you're staying here, which I know most people will, or going, we're all going to be active, because as we stay, we're going to be praying. We're going to be maybe sending evangelism teams up there to help and serve them. Those that go are going to be active because they're going to be finding new jobs, buying new homes, relocating to a new area, changing their whole way of life for the purpose of the advancement of the kingdom. And so those are both very active things. And so we want to recognize that this is something, even though all of us aren't going to go, this is something we're all participating in, because we're sending this. Yeah. This is part of what we're doing as a church. We're sending.
We're praying.
We're praying and sending. This is like, hey, this is part of what we believe our church is called to do, is to plant churches.
Yeah. No, great. Just to back up just a little. So this is one of the purposes and functions of the church, is to send.
Absolutely.
To plant. And
absolutely.
So when you say, like, you use the language like, we don't want to do it. We want to do it because it's obedient. We want to be obedient, and we aim to be obedient. But it hurts.
Absolutely.
Yes.
It hurts.
We want to do it, but we know we
don't want to send people away that we love.
Exactly. We want to fulfill the commandment, but we don't want to lose that fellowship.
Yeah, we don't want to lose people
relationships.
That we love. And I get it. Yeah. That's hard.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's a reminder as we work together to send people to plant a church. It's a reminder to ourselves, we're not home. Right. Because there will be one day when the mission of the gospel is over. And there are no other people, there are no other nations to go to, and there's nobody who's not a believer. And so we're not going to be sending anyone anywhere else. We're all going to be together. But that day is not today. And so if we try to recreate heaven on earth, we're always going to be disappointed. So a faithful church is always going to look to replicate in some way, shape, or form. Yeah. And that's what we want to do. We want to try to be faithful. We want to try to take risks for the advancement of the kingdom. Yeah. And so that's what we're trying to do here, and that's why we're getting behind something that's counterintuitive, because it doesn't make sense. Why would we send away people? Why would we send away people to start something somewhere else? Yeah. Yeah, there's like two ways I can really go with it. Like two questions that I have. You can pick which one you want to go with first, but let's take them both. Just go one at a time.
Yeah. How many have we sent out, and
how many churches
to?
Have we planted? Yeah. Yeah. So we've planted 3 churches in our history. That
started from here.
Yep. That have three churches, and by that we raised up 3 pastors and sent them. The first one was before I started in Tucson, Arizona. And so that church was planted from here in Tucson, I think like in 1999.
And they're still
going.
Awesome.
Yeah, doing well. Teaching people about Jesus and reaching out for the gospel. The second one we planted was in 2009 in Peoria, Arizona.
So we went relatively local.
Local, yeah. Grace Church out there. They're still going strong, preaching the gospel, loving on Jesus, or showing people to love Jesus. The third one we planted in 2013 in Austin, Round Rock, Texas, led by John Payne, and that church is still going strong. And so each one of those times it hurt.
Yeah.
But each one of those times we can look back and go, okay, there's fruit here.
Yeah,
and so that's what we anticipate doing with Boise. And I don't think this will be the last time. That doesn't mean that every pastor who we raise up is always going to be sent out. That's just not the way it's going to be. But at the same time, we wouldn't be faithful if we're not asking, what's the next plant that we're supposed to do?
Yeah.
When are we supposed to do that?
I guess to follow up with that is, have any of the churches that we sent out, have they sent out?
That's a good question. No, not to my knowledge.
And at some point, I'm sure they will.
I'm sure they will,
yeah.
but not to my knowledge, not yet.
Okay,
not to my knowledge. Yeah.
And then you mentioned like this being a call of the church to basically replicate or to send out. Is there other models?
There's other models for sure. Like one model is like the campus model. People
like more than one campus.
Yeah, people see that. And I mean, there are campus models out there. Like what that is you have one place that does the preaching, and then they sort of open satellite campuses around that area or other areas. And I mean, that's a model, that's a way to do it. And I suppose like maybe in some urban areas where it's expensive and it's hard to move there, I can see that. But in the main, we lean toward planting churches. One, because at a campus model, what ends up happening from my perspective, and I could be totally wrong, but my perspective is it becomes about that preacher more than about the purpose of Jesus Christ in the world.
So does the pastor go to more than one campus?
Usually it's like
or how
video. He's usually videoed into
virtually.
Yeah, virtually. And so or sometimes there's multiple pastors in different campuses and they share resources and stuff. It just depends. There's different models, right? And so I personally feel like it's better for us to train and plant churches that exist both in partnership with us and independent of us, where they're making their own decision in their own context, right? So let's say we have a satellite church in Payson, right? I don't know the community in Payson. I don't know those people, and so I could preach what we're preaching, and it may not be where they need help or where they need encouragement. And so that's one of the limitations. Like, it's not just one size fits all, because if we have like that, I mean, why don't we just have John Piper preach at all of our churches starting in 1999? He has videos. Let's just play all that all the time. It's not just you preach and we show up and okay. No, the preaching moment is for a certain people at a certain time in a certain place. And so that's my perspective.
Yeah. Plus the relationships.
Yeah. And plus the relationships for sure. But the relationships can be in any model, in any, in the campus model as well. That's not something that's not there. It just isn't. That's just not how we're going to build it. And I'm not throwing rocks at anybody.
Yeah.
But that's just not how we're gonna do it.
So, from your perspective, as someone who participated in basically 2 out of the last 3 send-outs here, right? Did I get that right?
Yeah.
How do you, as a leader here, identify someone who would be good to fulfill that, or be a good teacher, or I'm sorry, not teacher, a good pastor to be sent out?
Well, so the primary gift for anyone who's going to plant a church is preaching. So do they have the gift can they preach?
Yeah.
Right? It's one thing to preach once a month, once a quarter.
Yeah.
That's a lot easier than preaching every week, which is what a church planter has to do. So a church planter has to have a disposition to preach, because the primary thing about any church is the ministry of the word from the pulpit. That's first, that's most important. And so there's nothing more important than any church does every week. It's the ministry of the word on Sunday morning from the pulpit, the preaching and teaching of the word, right?
Yeah.
And so whoever leads must be able to do that.
Yeah.
And so that's primary. And so what you want to do is you want to find somebody who has the disposition to preach and teach and, lead from the behind a pulpit. And so, there's a measure of leadership gift as well, where you inspire people, because you don't want a preacher who's just informing everybody. You want inspiration. And so that's part of what we want to see. We want to see a guy who people want to follow. And, and it takes a cost, because anybody who can preach on a regular basis, folks are going to want to follow, and it's going to hurt when you send that person to another church, to another location.
Yeah.
Right.
Makes
And
sense.
so we think about Jeff Palin. That's the way he is.
Yeah.
He's a leader. He can preach. People want to follow him.
Yeah.
And I want to give him more opportunities. There's just not the same number of opportunities here. And so I believe that when he goes there, he'll be able to serve those people and grow. Yeah. He'll be able to serve those people that he is, he's reaching, who are already Christians in the area. There's lots of good churches in Boise. It's not like we're taking the gospel to Boise or anything like that, but it's a very unchurched place. And so it's not like they're everywhere. And so maybe there's Christians there that have relocated and they haven't found a church home yet. And there's definitely unbelievers there.
Yeah.
And so we want to send people there so that they can hear the gospel, and that there's a faithful community, because a church in any community is like an embassy. We're like an embassy to heaven, right?
Yeah.
And so the closest thing we have as a people when it comes to experiencing heaven is the local church. You don't get this at the universities. You don't get this in libraries. You don't get this in corporations. You don't get this in sports teams. You don't get this at any of our other jobs. But we get this here, because here we're united around the person of Jesus Christ, just like we will be in heaven. And so what we are is, as a local church, an embassy of heaven. So when someone who doesn't know Jesus comes in, it's appealing, because there's a sense in which this is unlike anything that happens anywhere else. And so that we want to have replicated both in this country and around the world. So there's also, like, when we think about missions, it's not just in this country. We want to go other places as well. Right. And so when we send, like, I pray that one day we'll be able to plant a church in another country. And so, for example, and it may look different, but it's the same in this way. So when we raise up people to go to Boise, they don't have to learn a new language. It's all in English, right? And we have a church plant. Like, we're praying for a team of people to go with Jeff and Barb, and there will be a church plant group, and that will be right from the beginning a church. Yeah. Right? Now, let's say, and then there will be transfer growth from people who maybe live too far from their church or haven't found a church, or there'll be Christians that joined that church, right? Now, if we send people to an unreached place, let's say we send 3 families to an unreached place, that's a church. Now, there's no transfer growth because there's no Christians there. And so you have all of your growth
language
is going
barrier,
to be,
maybe.
well, well, that's different. But all of your growth is going to be conversion growth. Right. But it's the same thing. We're not just looking to gain converts. We're looking to plant churches.
Yeah.
No matter where we do this. Now, it may be that we go to places and it takes the average, if you go to an unreached people group in an unreached place, the average length of time it takes to get your first convert is 7 years.
Wow.
And so that's one of the reasons we want to work with people. So we want to go to the unreached places that the Lord leads us to, but where we can work with people that are nationals, where they already know the language and they already know the culture, and we can send them back to their home language and home culture to plant a church, then we see that bears fruit as well.
Yeah. That's great. Yeah. So as far as, specifically to our denomination, like, we're sending out, is there churches from other churches in Sovereign Grace that might participate in that plant and be drawn to go to Boise?
Absolutely. Yeah. Once we'll communicate, hey, listen, we're going to plant a church in Boise, and there may be people there who are like, I want to join, or others that are thinking about going to Boise, or they got a job offer or something like that. Absolutely. Yeah. So that's part of the way it is. I mean, and in part of the benefit of being a part of our denomination in Sovereign Grace is that we plant churches all over the world. So like right now there's a church, I was talking to him this week. His name is Marcelo, and he's planting a church in Reynosa, which is on the other side of McAllen, Texas.
Well, I was going to ask you about, okay, keep going. Sorry.
He's on the other side of McAllen, Texas. He's he speaks English, but he's a Mexican going back home to plant a church in his hometown. See, he doesn't have to learn the culture, nor does he have to learn the language, because that's where he's from. Wow. He's going to plant a church, preach the gospel, and our hope and prayer is that we see many converts and many Christians strengthened and built up.
Yeah, I was going to ask you specifically about your work in the South American, Central American region. You've been active and helping with church planting there. How different is it in a foreign country than it is here.
It's the same.
It's the same
just
process.
a different language. It's the same Jesus, same Bible,
Same Jesus.
same. Yeah, it's
Christ-
there's
what
not
is
a Mexican
Cristo?
Jesus. There's not a Mexican Jesus or a Argentinian Jesus. It's the same one.
Yeah.
Here's a news flash to Americans: Jesus doesn't speak only English. I know that's rough, but anyway,
Multiple tongues.
Yeah, exactly. So it's the same Jesus, same Bible, same gospel, same goal, right?
Yeah.
And so we want to raise up church planters and send them to plant churches. And so I get the privilege to be able to help and equip pastors and give resources to pastors to be able to go do this in the places that, those churches, the sending churches feel like, hey, this is it's a call for us.
Yeah.
And so, anyway, that's a longer conversation.
Yeah,
Maybe we
I
talk
just
about
wanted
it
to
another
touch on
time, but
that.
yeah, that's.
And then I guess just last one, as far as the whole process. So like you already explained how you might identify like someone who would be a good church plant
Leader.
Yeah. And how long is that process from the point they identify the Lord has put it on their heart that they want to go to?
It's very.
I know
it
varies.
It varies. I mean, I've known people that it took 10 years. I've known people who've taken 5, 3. It just depends.
Okay.
The other question that is worth thinking about is who should go with them.
Leadership wise, or
no, just participation wise. Yeah.
Well, that's what I was going to say. That
planning a church is really difficult because it takes everybody working hard. Now, that's the way it is for every church. And you might think, oh, there's all kinds of stuff that happens here and it's super easy. It's not. And you can serve around here in ways that we need. But anyway, that's another conversation. But at a church plant, we need everybody on deck. And so that means if your marriage is troubled, if you're having spiritual problems, you should not go.
Yeah.
Because
it's going to be hard when you get there anyways.
It's going to be hard, and any weakness is going to be amplified. Or we're all weak, but any, say, patterns of sin that are not dealt with are going to be amplified, and they're going to be exacerbated, and it's trouble. And so, one of the ways we've said it is if you're in sick bay, don't think about going, because going to another city does not make things better.
No. Because
the trick is when you go, you're still you, no matter where you live. And so your problems, they follow. In fact, your problems beat you there. They get there faster than you do. And so that's like if you're thinking, I want to go have a fresh start and this will be fun. It's not. It's hard and it's difficult, and you really need to be called to it.
That's awesome. Speaking of being called to it, if that's something that you are interested in, then you can reach out to Jeff or to Rich. And we just ask that you pray for the church plant in Boise, that you give strength to the people going, that you bless our plant there, and if the Lord puts that on your heart, that you go there and work faithfully as well. And I'm not saying that because we want you to leave, but we want to be obedient to fulfilling the Great Commission. So thank you for explaining all that.
Absolutely.
If you have any questions, feel free to reach out at production@centergilbert.com. Thank you so much for tuning in.
Have a good one.
God bless.